There was a scene where, I think it was the night before, was it before January 6th, when your father came out to the car and said to you, anyway, tell the story because it was really moving.
So this was on New Year's Eve, so December 31st, 2020. Mm-hmm. And we had just been through the process of working on the Secretary of Defense letter, the letter that was signed by all living Secretaries of Defense, because we were hearing about things that were happening at the Pentagon that were really concerning. And so I worked with my dad and with Eric Edelman to get the living Secretaries of Defense to issue this public warning to Chris Miller, who was the acting secretary, and to Donald Trump and to others about the use of the military in affecting the outcome of American elections. And as we had been working on that, the next day we had lunch at my parents' house, and when we were leaving, my dad came out, and he came around to where I was, and on the passenger side of the car, and he looked at me as he was saying goodbye, and he said to me, "Defend the Republic, daughter." And I said, "I will, Dad, always."
I need to start telling my daughters to defend the Republic more, daughter.
Yeah.
You know, I need to be better about that.
It has an impact.
Never done it before, but you know. All right, why don't we? We'll try to do a lightning round thing because I think we have a lot of questions and we don't have that much time. So we'll start there, then we'll go there, and we'll work our way through.
Thank you. Ms. Cheney, I have actually maybe 500 questions I'd like to ask you, but I'm not even going to ask you one. Instead, I know that as a representative in Congress, you have very little opportunity to read mail, and probably have even less of a likelihood to read mail from someone like me who's from Maryland. So I would like to read you just a very short letter that I sent to you on January 13th, 2021, after your vote on impeachment. Dear Congresswoman Cheney, your vote on impeachment was right. Democracy cannot exist amongst lies from its leaders. Your vote on impeachment was difficult. Leadership is making the right decision in tough cases. Your vote on impeachment was honorable. Our founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. You will retain yours. I cannot say the same thing about others.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The outpouring of support and the comments like that, I can't tell you how much they mean, and I know not just for me, but for others who have done the right thing at all levels. And so please know it really makes a difference, and it's really important to make sure that we're all helping to reinforce others who are doing the right thing as well, because there's certainly a lot of loud voices on the other side. But thank you very much for reading that and for sending it. Thank you.
I apologize because I'm sure you're tired of hearing it, and it's on the same vein as my mate, and that is that I have to tell you that my family and I disagree with you on 90% of your policy positions, but my sister and I are overwhelmed with gratitude and privilege and honor to tell you personally that you are our Shiro, you're an American treasure, and we thank you. And we thank you and your wonderful family for your courage, your strength, your integrity. We can't imagine what you and your family go through, and we are so, so grateful to you and your family. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, show of hands. How many people voted for Dick Cheney for vice president in 2004? All right, we got
That's
a few.
not fair. Hey, there's a couple.
We got a few. Yeah, we got
They're
the
related
Cheney
to me,
section
but-
here. Yeah, that's true. Sorry. All right, what's your shirt say? Faithful and fearless.
That is that's a Team Cheney shirt
Oh.
right there.
All right.
I'm not going to stand here and tell you all the ways I think you're wonderful because we don't have all week. So all I'm going to say is that I think you're going to go down as one of the greatest patriots this country has ever known. But I do also have a question. I'm a Midwestern Democrat, have been one all my life. And I know that in the blue bubble, it's very easy for us to stand there and go, well, obviously he's unfit and a danger to the country. Like, yeah, obviously. But there's a lot of people who are hearing very different, and they're not, we need to get the message out of the bubble. And as a Midwesterner, I know some of the reasons why so many of my fellow Midwesterners flipped to, I mean, I'm from Indiana. We went for Obama in 2008, and then we went for Trump in 2016. And there's a reason for that. To quote my forever candidate, Senator Amy Klobuchar, she said, a lot of Midwesterners are feeling left behind at the gas station, and we are. How do we get the message out of the bubble? How do we make people listen to say that, yes, we understand, yes, there are things we need to change. Neither party is perfect, God knows. I also disagree with you on basically everything not named Vladimir Putin. But you are dead on the message that there is so much more to this than a partisan struggle, and how do we cross-pollinate, because we can't win this without working together.
Yeah, it is maybe the most important question that we're facing, and I think there are a couple of things that really matter. One is to understand that that what Trump has done is, partly what you're saying. He's tapped into people around the country, really good people in many cases, who feel like their voices aren't heard, and convinced them that he would speak for them. And that's the con man aspect of it. And when I think about the really good people across Wyoming, who he's taken money from, who, these fundraising frauds that continue to go on to this day, and that he's convinced that if they're with him, he'll help somehow bring this country back. And so I think one thing we have to do, and I think maybe the most important thing in terms of this next election, is make sure that the independent voters know he's not the lesser of two evils, he's not an acceptable option, and those independents can never feel like, listen, you know what, we might not like what he did, but we're worried about the economy or national security or whatever the issue is, and so we're going to be with Trump. And just by the way, we've seen over the last few days performances by some of Trump's strongest allies in Congress. And I'm talking about Elise Stefanik. And her questioning of the presidents of those universities, the questioning, I think, was right. It was tremendous. The answers that she got from those presidents were disgraceful. But she is one of Donald Trump's staunchest supporters, and Donald Trump dines with Nick Fuentes, who is a Holocaust denier, who is somebody who, on a daily basis, calls for the elimination of Israel and much worse. And so I think that making sure people understand that Donald Trump's allies, Donald Trump himself, are no friends of Israel or are no friends of the Jewish people, that can't be a reason why people decide that they're going to go that way. But ultimately recognizing we aren't going to convince some of the hardest core supporters, but we can convince independents. And this goes back to those independents, though, have to have a place to go. And I don't know yet exactly where that place is going to be, but people have to know there's a choice that is not Donald Trump.
Thank you.
Hi. Ooh. Okay, it's very, very, very humbling to be in front of two exceptional people. My aunt got me Thank You for Your Servitude. I loved it.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that if I didn't get it today,
Yeah.
she would have also gotten me Oath and Honor.
Yeah.
So earlier you said that you endorsing any Republican candidate would probably make you lose votes. I want to ask you more of an optimistic question. Do you think that instead of 2016 there being a silent majority, now there is a silent plurality of Republicans who support you? They just don't do it, you know.
They just don't know it.
They just don't know it, exactly.
Look, I mean, if you look at the polls among, for example, these latest polls of Republican voters in Iowa, for example, there are as many Republicans who don't support Donald Trump as those who do. Now, the problem is, that means that he's 30 points ahead or something among his closest opponent. But I do believe that if you look at where his support is nationally among Republicans, there are more members of the party who understand that he's dangerous, who do not support him, than there are who do. Now, what that means, though, is we have to get those people mobilized. And we also, look, there are really big, important issues that the Democrats are not addressing right now that are causing people to think, well, we might have to vote for Donald Trump, things like the border. And that's, I have, as Mark has pointed out, I have a lot more Democratic friends now than I used to have. But I tell them, like, you guys have to not be crazy, because if you're going to be crazy, you're going to drive people to Trump. So there are some places like immigration policy where we have to see some changes.
Message to Democrats: don't be crazy. Hi.
First, I agree with what everyone said about your courage and your honor. You used the term personality cult, and that's discussed quite a bit as if Donald Trump were the problem. But he was the Republican nominee in 2016. People knew what he was like. It was no secret. He ran his presidency in the way that many people feared. Despite the fact that there was January 6th, he's far and ahead of any other candidate. There aren't a lot of Republicans lining up to not just to challenge him, but to even say, maybe that's not right. And there are other ways in which the Republican Party is supportive of autocrats around the world. So is the problem one of personality, or did Donald Trump really sort of emulate what was happening in the Republican Party already, at least to some extent?
Well, I think there are several things. One, I think that many of us who supported him, many Republicans, thought, all right, he'll grow into the job. And I certainly thought that. I had been around presidents. I understood how the White House worked. I understood there are structures in place that help a president do his job, that most presidents, when they take office, they're sort of overwhelmed when they recognize the truly awesome power of that office, and that has an impact. Clearly, I was wrong. And so, I think that certainly there were reasons why many of us, wished that we had understood sooner and had not supported him. Obviously, I wish he had never been president. And I think that you are right with respect to the autocratic connections going on right now. And, the fact that you have so many vocal Republicans doing Putin's bidding with respect to Ukraine is a very troubling thing. I think you do actually have, a Putin wing of the Republican Party right now. But I also think that it's wrong to say that somehow that's where the party has always been headed, because certainly the people who are taking the party today down that path, for example, from a national security perspective, are doing something that Ronald Reagan could never have imagined. If you had told Ronald Reagan this is what the party will be doing on national security, he wouldn't have believed it. So something else is going on, and I think that it's a convergence of factors, but it's a situation where Donald Trump has taken advantage of it. Donald Trump is also now teaching other politicians how they should operate, and in some ways, the people that I hold most responsible beyond Donald Trump are those Republican officials who know better, and that's most of them, who understand that he's dangerous and that he's lying and yet won't do anything. Those are the people that I think are most responsible for where we are.
We can take one more question from each microphone, and then the last two questions from the virtual audience.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nathan Weissler, and my question is, in starting to read the book, I saw your reference in the photo section to your memories of President Ford, and my question is, what do you think is particularly important for future generations to know about President Ford and his leadership and the contributions that he made at the time he was in office?
Well, I have a very a soft spot in my heart for President Ford. I knew him when I was a little girl, and knew him as a good man, and now understanding the role that he played and the way that he served the country. And he was fundamentally a man of character and decency, and we have had presidents of character and decency on both sides of the political aisle, and those are the kinds of people that we should be electing. And people who didn't vilify their political opponents. And again, this is someplace where I think all of us who've been involved in politics for some time are guilty of vilifying our opponents to some extent. And I think we all have to do a much better job at realizing the country's better off if we're debating substance and policy and not engaged in personal attacks. Thank you.
First, I want to thank you and your family for your service. We're very grateful to you. The parallels in history are just, they made my blood ice. And I'm thinking 90 years ago, when someone had come to power, was kicked out of power, and came back with a vengeance. So one of the things that troubles me the most is the humble voter, which we have to put our trust in for the next election, is one thing, but people do tend to act tribally. The more important thing for me are the changes in the legislation that have been going on, and I think you pointed out in the early part of your book about the Electoral College. And the question in my mind is, what are you hearing is happening on the ground? What kind of mischief is happening? Will we be faced with a legitimized second group of electors? And where do we go from there?
Well, so I think with respect to the Electoral Count Act, one thing that's really important to remember in Congress, just as my term was ending, we actually passed reforms to the Electoral Count Act. Now, Donald Trump says that what he was doing was legal under the previous bill, and that's why we had to reform it, which, of course, is absolutely wrong. What he did was illegal under the previous Electoral Count Act, is illegal under the current Electoral Count Act, and unconstitutional. But we did take steps to help to clarify situations in which For example, state officials could attempt to delay elections, and the House bill in that regard was better in my view than the Senate bill, but there has been improvements. Having said that, there's no legislative fix to a president who will attempt to blow through the guardrails of democracy. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that we have put in place legislation that can anticipate what might happen. But this goes back to the point we were discussing earlier, which is that individuals at the end of the day matter. And so in each state, looking at the races that involve secretaries of state, governors, individuals who will have the ability to determine whether they want to certify an election or not, we have to make sure we don't elect people who are only going to respect the elections if they agree with the outcome. And that's incumbent upon voters all across the country. And we have to, what I find too often is that what's happening today with respect to Donald Trump is people are exhausted by it, and they don't want to have to deal with it because it's so dire. And what I can tell you is the people that are pushing Donald Trump and the people who are working to try to get him elected, working to elect people who support him all up and down the ballot, they're really organized and they're energized. And so if those of us who understand how dangerous he is decide, you know what, it's just too complicated or too painful or we can't be involved, then we risk that they'll prevail. And so we're in a situation in our democratic process where every voter has to be accountable for finding good candidates, for supporting them, for putting your own name on the ballot, for running, because what we know for sure is the process itself will crumble if people don't get active and engaged in stopping what he's trying to do. The other thing I would say is it's a very real thing that foreign actors, adversaries, will attempt once again to intervene in our elections. And so we have to take that threat very seriously as well, and do everything that we can at the local level, at the state level, and nationally to protect our systems against that kind of foreign intervention.
Thank you.
All right. I want to take a couple of questions from our virtual audience. For Liz, I guess I'll start with Katie from Washington State. Who or what has led to the sense of integrity that you have? I don't agree with you on anything politically. Why do they always have to include that caveat? I mean, we get it. You don't agree with her on anything. All right, great. But you are full of integrity and character, and you spread truth to power, and I admire you for that. Thank you. So I guess the original question was, who or what has led to the sense of integrity that you have? Liz?
Well, Katie might not like this answer, but Dick Cheney. And Lynn Cheney, who I'm sure is watching, and so. But it is really true that watching my parents and watching my dad go through particularly periods of time when people were saying things that weren't very nice about him, and understanding what it means to have the courage of your convictions. And I think also the fact that my mom and dad really cared that Mary and I understood history and read history and knew the history of the country. But I also I think that it's important to say that they're hard questions to answer because it doesn't. there was not a moment where I thought, should I do this or should I do that? Because it seems to me that it's obvious what had to be done. And it's also humbling and very moving. But I also think it's not courage, because, you know, if you think about people that landed at Normandy, that's courage. You think about people that have made tremendous sacrifices in war, that is courage. The last couple of years have been about duty and what's required, and I think that's how I look at it.
My wife is in the audience, so she can attest to this. I did a profile of Dick Cheney about 20 years ago, and I came home and she looked at me and said, all right, what was he like? And I said, you know, it was kind of a trip. We were touring, he was touring the new Air and Space Museum over by Dulles Airport, and John Travolta was there for some reason. And Dick Cheney walks around a corner, and he's got his detail, and there is John Travolta. And guess which one of them was really starstruck in that moment? It was not John Travolta, or it was not Dick Cheney. It was John Travolta. He was like, oh my gosh. And I don't think your dad knew who John Travolta was in that moment. Anyway, that concludes
John Wayne, he would have known.
John Wayne, yes. That concludes the John Travolta section of this talk. Lisa from Potomac asks, did participating in the January 6th hearings change your perception of yourself personally, and did it change your perception of this country in any way?
You know, it gave me tremendous hope when I saw sitting there when Cassidy Hutchinson walked out alone to testify, or Sarah Matthews, Rusty Bowers, hearing the stories of these people who did the right thing was very inspirational. Working with Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi and Zoe Lofgren, members that I didn't know, certainly changed my perspective, and I think it probably changed theirs. I know they thought it was weird to be working with me, but so it did. It also, I think all of us stopped more than once and said, we're operating in a nonpartisan fashion, and we also aren't, trying to one-up each other when the television cameras are on and we're trying to score political points. And our staff was essentially totally, from a partisan perspective, integrated. I didn't know the party affiliation of the vast majority of the investigators. They were career prosecutors. There were senior Republicans that I brought on, senior Democrats too. But that's how congressional committees, ought to work.
Right.
And so I think that was eye-opening for me, certainly.
So we've gone over a little bit. I just want to say before we wrap up, Liz, it's been just an honor and a privilege to share the bema with you. There's a sentence I never thought I was going to say. Again, everyone should read the book, and you should, if you haven't bought it yet, buy it at Politics and Prose, and buy all your books at Politics and Prose. And Liz, I look forward to see what you're going to do next, because this is obviously extremely important. I don't think there's anything more important right now in this country, maybe in this world. So thank you for what you've done and what you will do in the future.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you can please stay standing.